So good to be here with you this morning. It's a pleasure to be amongst friends. We see so many of you that we know, people that we've worked with, friends, family members, just a whole group of wonderful, wonderful people that are here to fight this good fight. And indeed it is, and we're grateful to be a part of this battle with you. We'll be talking about the concept of battling today. And we know that everyone here has a specific kind of battle that they're involved in and engaged in as it relates to these issues. We all are, because of the things that we're having to deal with that were talked about and discussed in the first session. They wanted us to introduce ourselves first. I'm going to do that very, very quickly. I'm Dan Gray. This is my good colleague, Dorothy Marion. My good colleague, Todd Olson. Will be presenting this session this morning. We are a part of the LifeStar Network, which is a program that has been put together for the treatment of addiction, sexual addiction, pornography addiction, and compulsive behaviors. We treat individuals and couples that are struggling with these issues, and we'll be discussing the couples issues here today pretty extensively. As many here know through experience with others, and maybe even in your own experience, that when pornography and compulsive sexual behaviors are introduced into a marriage, that it tears away at the very core and fiber of those relationships. We know that as we see people that struggle with this, the pain and the anguish that occurs, the feelings of desperation, betrayal that are there. So today we're going to discuss why these behaviors have such a negative impact on relationships, why trust and safety are lost when these behaviors are introduced, and how we can retrieve and acquire back those feelings of trust and safety in the relationship. Pretty key factors as we go through these struggles. To really set the stage for where we're going to be going with this today, I'd like to first talk about what constitutes a healthy relationship. What constitutes a healthy marriage? So I'd like for you just to think about it for a few moments. What comes to your mind? What do you picture? Do you picture a couple that you know? Do you picture your own relationship? Do you see someone that has experienced pain and hurt because they are not in that kind of relationship? But what comes to your mind when you think of what a healthy relationship is? What principles come to your mind? Maybe it's something that you think about in terms of concepts or words. What constitutes a happy relationship? I just looked at this. This is me 5 years ago when I had hair. 2 years ago? I wish. When we think of the words that most people think of when we take a look at a healthy relationship, and why did that go that way? Okay. Some words that come very, very quickly to most of us, and that is also in the literature as we take a look at what the research indicates, is attachment and connectedness. When you ask a couple, why do you feel safe in this relationship? They'll usually use terms like, I feel attached, I feel connected. There's a bonding that's there. And the research is really very, very clear in terms of indicating that these terms of attachment are very important as we understand what happens when there's a disruption of those feelings in the relationship. And when that is interrupted, there is a tremendous amount of damage that occurs that we'll be discussing today. Then what are the words that come to our mind when we think of attachment and connectedness? And these four here, trust, safety, commitment, and bonding, are four that we hear very, very frequently. Trust. What does trust mean to you? Trust is associated with integrity, a sense of honesty, that I believe what you say, I believe what you represent yourself to be, I believe what you are. And then the sense of safety, if you kind of take a look at the underlying feelings of trust, safety is more related to emotion, a sense of well-being, a sense of peace. In the midst of the craziness of life, I still feel safe with you. I trust how you feel about me, and I trust how I feel about you. And that creates that sense of safety within. We won't talk much about this here today, but who has read the Twilight series? Yeah, you're right. There are many more. You're just not admitting it. Who's been to the movies? Okay. This is it's about a vampire, isn't it? Why is there such a furor about it? Why is there such an interest in it? Well, in my opinion, it's because we have an issue of safety and trust in the relationship. Think about Edward, a vampire, who has this great passion for his woman Bella. And why is she drawn and pulled to him? Well, he's a good-looking guy, sure. But she feels safe with this man. He has this incredible passion for life and for death, I guess. But he has this passion, and he has it for Bella. And there's a lot within him that says, I want to do her harm, but I'm committed to keep her safe. And so the real story is about a woman feeling safe with a man. That I'm okay with you. You're not going to harm me. You're going to protect me and protect my safety at any cost. When there's safety, there are no agendas. I'm okay with you. You're okay with me. So what creates that sense of safety? Well, there are a lot of things we could talk about. In fact, we could take hours in discussing this. A couple of terms I want us to be familiar with. One is commitment. Now, I'm going to refer all of you to the April edition of Psychology Today. There's an article in here that talks about the love fix. And think about the description of commitment in relation to pornography use and when a person is not focusing their sexual attention and love on that person that they've committed to. Affirmation, which means then the connectedness between one another, affirming each other's love, promotes trust in the partner and strengthens commitment, and commitment is a key predictor of relationship durability. It creates positive bias towards each other. It immunizes the relationship against potential distractions, all those perfect others. It motivates the derogation of alternative partners. It creates the perception that even the most attractive alternative partners are unappealing. Attention to them gets turned off. Partners see each other in ways that enhance their connection and fend off threats. Again, back to what constitutes a happy relationship. Oxytocin, I'm going to talk about it in relationship to bonding. That bonding relation, that feeling of being connected again. We're learning that it isn't just a psychological issue, it's a biochemical issue as well. As we understand the nature of what happens when two people come together in a committed relationship and then have a sexual union together, there's some pretty magical things that happen. We know that, we feel it. But we're now knowing through the study of the brain and the effects upon the brain of sexual arousal patterns what happens to us internally. In creating that bondedness with that partner, that trigger that we're connecting with. And keep in mind, this is in relationships where we're connected and loving, and it also affects those that are looking at pornography or disrupting that connection to their partner and attaching this bondedness to a picture or an image in their mind. What is oxytocin? It's been known as the bonding hormone between a mother and a newborn child. We've known that for many, many years. We now know because of the studies that it not only helps with that bonding between the mother and her child, it helps with the release of breast milk for feeding at the child. But now, very, very important, that during sexual arousal and sexual release during an orgasm and the completion of that sexual act, that oxytocin is secreted extensively in the male and female body. So there's a bonding that is created biochemically. Studies have shown that an increase of trust is also enhanced by the insurgence of oxytocin. And in another study, bonding and love has a strong neurochemical basis. So you put the dots together now. We'll be talking about what happens when those connections are disrupted, when that oxytocin is diluted to other objects or other individuals outside of that marriage relationship, and why then it disrupts the marriage as it does. I'm going to now turn the time over to Dorothy, who works a lot with the partners and couples in dealing with these issues.
All right, so I'm going to describe to you what happens to the relationship with the disclosure of a pornography addiction. And just so you know, in working with women and gauging their trauma, the trauma that comes from a pornography addiction is equal to that comes from infidelity. Women, we don't tend to make the distinction of this was okay because it was only pictures. It hits women the same as in terms of trauma. Okay, John Breer, a leading expert on complex trauma, has stated that because we are wired to connect with others, the closer the person is who hurts us, the more traumatic the experience. And so when we have this experience within that relationship, the partners are really dealing with trauma. It's not just, oh, this was a bad thing that happened. Most women are very, very traumatized by this experience. So I found, you know how you can find anything on the internet? So I found some pictures that are somewhat represent, I think, what happens. So we start out in a very romantic, colorful, exciting, and creative relationship. Time goes on, we become fairly reliable, good members of the community, pretty serious folks, and then there's just a disclosure of pornography. And this is pretty much what happens to the partner. And this is who we see in therapy. The man is relatively detached, I've got a problem, and the wife is traumatized. We have a saying often at our office that when the addict comes out of the closet, often the wife goes in. Trauma is very isolating. It's very difficult for the person that's been traumatized to feel like other people are going to understand this experience. It's been difficult to even try to express or explain what that trauma feels like and looks like for a partner. But imagine if you were to go to bed one night knowing that the sky was blue, only to wake up in the morning to find that it was green. It can be that disorienting, that experience of suddenly not knowing what is real anymore. And many partners after disclosure are so traumatized that they really don't know, how do I live in this world that has become green when I thought my whole life and based my decisions on the fact that this was a blue sky and not a green sky. A lot of women talk about it as being incredibly shattering. And it shatters that internal world of a partner. It can affect her spirituality, her work, her parenting, obviously the sense of herself as a woman. I think probably one of the most painful things to see is it often changes how she views the world. The world is no longer a safe place, that safety is gone. I had one woman that came into therapy and she said, I spent the day looking through scrapbooks of the family, and I would come across pictures of us, and we're happy, we're smiling, and then I realized, but he was acting out at that time. I don't know if we were happy. I don't know anymore what is real. It tends to completely begin to unravel a person's history and their past. Many of you will come in contact with someone who is going through this experience in their relationship. maybe some of you have gone through this experience, but I want to just briefly go over some of the symptoms of trauma so you can be aware of what partners often go through. Okay, and I'm not going to, they're on the handout that we're going to give out to you, so I'm not going to read them all, but I just want to point out a couple of them. You know, there is fear and anxiety, irritability. Some of the women talk about this sense of intrusive thoughts of the trauma are so difficult because it becomes consuming. They can't get it out of their minds. They go over and over and over what they've heard. They go over past events, and it begins to kind of take over their lives. Okay. Feelings of panic or being out of control. Obviously, difficulty trusting. Feelings of betrayal. And probably one of the biggest things that we see are that most partners will take on a sense of responsibility or self-blame for the addiction. Most of them will say, I think I wasn't enough in the relationship, because if I had been, and then fill in the blank here, prettier, thinner, a better cook, more interesting, he wouldn't have gone outside the relationship to get his needs met. And that is probably one of the most damaging pieces of this for women. Okay. Obviously, what comes with that is a deep sense of shame. And so a woman, again, that contributes to the isolation. Who do I tell about this? I am kind of ashamed because I'm afraid it was partly my fault. And then we see a lot of preoccupation with body image. I'll have women say to me, I can't look in the mirror anymore because I think about what he has seen and I know I will never measure up to that. And I hate my body. Okay. A partner's response to this type of betrayal typically falls into something that we call a trauma response or a trigger, meaning they have a very strong emotional response to a perceived threat triggered by the past trauma. So a trigger or a trauma response will come forth from something in the environment, something on the media, and it literally triggers the partner back into that pain and some of those symptoms that you've seen. That's why sometimes, you know, when people will get advice with this and they say, well, you need to leave things in the past. Well, when you're being triggered and having trauma responses, things are not in the past. They're very much in the present and have to be dealt with in the present. So a trauma response or a trigger is, you know, depending on the way the partner has found out and the existing relationship, but it can be something as simple as sitting down to watch the news and hearing about another celebrity's infidelity. And that can just trigger that partner back into those fears those feelings of betrayal. It can be something as simple as driving down the street and she realizes that she just passed the store where he rented DVDs or videos. A few years ago, I think for some reason, everybody that went to the University of Utah was on a mailing list for Victoria's Secret or some magazine, something like that. And so all these women suddenly received these catalogs in the mail. Big trigger of why are we getting this? What's happening? It can be as simple as a husband saying, hey, I'll be home at 6, and he doesn't come home till 6:30. By the time he comes in the door, she's been triggered. She's in anxiety, she's angry, she may rage at him. He's like, I was stuck in traffic. Okay. But all of that emotion is pulled back into that moment. And we're going to talk a little bit later on what to do with that. I had a spiritual leader at one point call me who had the experience of having a woman that he was working with call him in a grocery store, unable to function because she had just walked by the magazine section and had seen a man reading a magazine and had been triggered back into the trauma. And the trauma is those feelings of not being safe. It's particularly hard if in that relationship the husband has been the one that that woman has turned to for her safety. Okay? And so suddenly she can't turn to him anymore. He doesn't feel safe. She may even see him as dangerous. You can see how difficult that can be within that relationship. Okay. So we're going to talk about what the addict can do to start to restore safety, but just in a more general sense, if you are a friend or a neighbor or a spiritual leader, a sister, a mother, and this is obvious, but the biggest piece is to listen, to give that person a chance to talk and then talk and then talk. One way of helping to move through trauma is to be able to talk about it in a place where they feel safe. It's important to encourage that person not to make any major life decisions in that moment, because again, a lot of that is coming out of a sense of trauma, if that's possible. We need to allow for the experience of grief. Grief takes a long time. Most of us get impatient with it. Okay? We can listen for a little while and then we're saying, really? You still feel bad? You know, it's been a month. Okay? We need to do a better job at just being with people as when they're sad. Okay? And then we need to understand their ambivalence. On the one hand, they're devastated. They're angry at the addict. They're just distraught that their partner would do this. On the other hand, this has been their safe place. They're in love with this man. He's the father of their children. They have years in history together. Okay, so there's going to be ambivalence there. And so it's important that you don't step in and say, well, yeah, he's an idiot and you should divorce him. Because that pushes her into that place that says, yeah, but he has been there for me in the past, right? So you don't want to do that to someone. There's a beautiful quote by Catholic priest Henry Nouwen, who I think describes this very well, and I'm going to read it very quickly. It says, being with a friend in great pain is not easy. It makes us uncomfortable. We do not know what to do or what to say, and we worry about how to respond to what we hear. Our temptation is to say things that come more out of our own fear than out of our care for the person in pain. Sometimes we say things like, well, you're doing a lot better than yesterday, or you will soon be your old self again, or I'm sure you will get over this, or maybe you should focus on forgiveness. But often we know that what we're saying is not true, and our friends know it too. We do not have to play games with each other. We can simply say, I am your friend. I am happy to be with you. We can say that in words or with touch or with loving silence. Sometimes it is good to say, you don't have to talk. I am here with you, thinking of you, praying for you, and loving you.
The one that's struggling with the addiction, the addict, often carries with them a great amount of shame. And when confronted by their partners, anger or trauma triggers or emotional upsets, they have a difficult ability responding with empathy, kindness, and validation. It gets overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of shame and rejection that they feel. And so they don't respond really well at first. And that's what we want to talk about today. Here are some mistaken responses to trauma and triggers. The first one, because of the shame and because of the confrontation, is defensiveness. The person wants to instinctively protect themselves, and so they'll get defensive. And you all know the different techniques that you use to be defensive. The second one is the victim stance. Listening to your partner's pain or anger will often trigger feelings of shame and sorrow. You may feel terrible about your partner's pain and proceed to beat yourself up emotionally. I'm no good. I'll never be enough for her. I'm such a failure. Nobody understands how hard this is. What about me? And when is she ever going to start looking at her stuff? The person is not safe for his partner when he does that. She's saying to herself right there, great, I go to him with my problem, and now he's the victim, and I'm going to take care of him. And so she's not safe there either. She is actually re-traumatized with that. Turning the table is quite a common one because it's another defense mechanism. When the partner has a legitimate complaint about her husband, she's, hey, I've been triggered, like those triggers that Dorothy was talking about, and he's been doing good for 2 months, or even 6 months or a year. It doesn't matter how long that is. But he responds to her in such a way and turns the table and makes it look like she's to blame. And she walks away apologizing and scratching her head, wondering, I had a legitimate complaint here. I know I was right, and I'm the one saying sorry and walking away. And so the addicts have an ability to turn the tables and make the person look like something that they've done, changing the subject or whatever, and turn that around and make the person look like that they are to blame. We often call that crazy making. Stuck in logic and reason is one of the most common ones that men will do. They will know they're doing good. They'll feel that in their soul, and they just know it. And so let's just say a guy has a couple good months of his recovery. He's doing really well, and the wife has some complaints. And he knows she's not right. No, I haven't looked at anything, I promise. And he starts going through all logic and reason, and look what I do with the kids, look what kind of dad I am, look what I'm doing with the neighbors, I bring home income, and he falls into logic and reason, and she's not safe on that one either because he's not battling for her heart. He's basically defending his stance. He may be true and accurate on that, but this is not about right or wrong. When you get into reason and logic, you just fall into the trap of right and wrong, or correct or incorrect. Ignore and avoid is a typical one where the wife might be triggered. Let's say the husband comes home and he can sense that the wife is a little off and she may have been triggered on something during the day. He can tell that. And so what does he do? He avoids it, hoping she'll work it out on herself and hoping she doesn't bring anything up. Let's just let this go and hopefully it will work out. These are some real common responses to trauma triggers that are not what we want to have. Through scientific research, we now have evidence that sexual addiction creates changes in the brain that impair judgment and the ability to emotionally respond to others. And some of the research that are out on the bookstore out here, He Restoreth My Soul. Don Hilton is a neurosurgeon out of Texas, and he focuses on that. If you want a good book to read, that one will help you a lot. Understanding the biochemical nature of what happens to the prefrontal cortex with someone struggling with drugs or addiction of any kind, including pornography and sexual compulsive behaviors. Knowing the brain changes can be repaired is very reassuring to us. When the frontal cortex is damaged, and we just listed just a few bullet points here, there are many, many other functions of the frontal cortex versus the repaired healthy brain. The unavailability of emotions versus I have the ability to feel and express my emotions. Those who are struggling with sexual addiction have a real hard time with affect regulation and dealing with the wife coming to the husband with a complaint. They don't do that very well. They fall back into the fight or flight mode with all those defense mechanisms we just talked about. They have poor judgment, they lack empathy and validation, and the impulse control problems are there too. Basically what Dr. Hilton talks about in his book is their brake system is not functioning. They have no brake system. We'll talk in a moment about what to do about no brake system. versus having a good judgment, empathy, impulse control, and having a healthy brake system operating. Creating safety and restoring and repairing the brain. Number one, the most important thing to do is get into recovery. Achieve sobriety. Work hard at recovery. The wife will see that. She'll see that the husband's working hard. His main focus is that. Sometimes husbands will get into treatment because they want to save their marriage. Sometimes they want to avoid pain. We don't care why they get into treatment. We want them to stay for the right reason. The right reason is so they can get better and so they can heal themselves. If they do that, they will save their marriage. Doing whatever it takes. We have people that move out of state. They come to a place that they know where there's treatment, or out of a city that's not been a good city for them. They'll change jobs working at a high-rise building where 90% of the employees are women in pantyhose and skirts. Skirts too. And they will say, I can't work here anymore. It's not time for me. And so they'll quit their job. They'll take all the TVs out of their house. They'll do whatever it takes. They'll read whatever it takes. They'll start their exercise program. They'll follow what the treatment program says to do. Transparency and honesty. That one right there, and we'll have a couple quotes from some of our people that we've had in treatment in just a moment about this. Transparency, honesty. That is the most important thing that you can remember in recovery, because secrets are the lifeblood of addiction. So not only for the person in recovery to be totally honest and totally transparent, but for the spouse, it creates a great deal of safety. As Dorothy mentioned, the spouse would much, much more want to know the truth, even if it's a yucky truth, than to be lied to. I just want to know. It will create safety for me. Becoming intentional and proactive. I will do this. It's like battling. It's like I'm going to go forward, and this is what I do. I never wait for my wife to come to me. I go to her. I check in with her every night. Hey, let's check in. I want to let you know about my day. I will text my wife during the day. I will write her a note. I will court her more than I did before we were married. I am intentional in what I do, and I am proactive. Battling for your partner's heart. Some addicts have used the idea of battling for their wife's heart as a way to define proactivity. They use the word battling because it indicates that to earn back their partner's trust, they will have to fight for it. Battling implies action. It implies preparation and practice and diligence. It also implies a commitment and a belief in their cause. They have found better successes in recovery when they have defined themselves as warriors rather than victims to their addictions. I am not going to be a victim. I am going to fight. This took me out for a while. It will no longer take me out. Dan, why don't you read a couple quotes?
And these are direct quotes, just real short. I cannot afford to hide things anymore. I no longer will. If I am struggling, I immediately let my wife know. Another one, being transparent is the best thing I do to provide safety for my wife. She has open access to my BlackBerry, my phone, and my email account. I check in with her during the day with text messages and phone calls. I also court her and pursue her more than I have ever done in my life.
And Dorothy has one from the partner, I believe.
Bob and I had been working on honesty in our marriage. As our anniversary was approaching, I shared with him that special occasions like birthdays and anniversaries and holidays were triggering, because he just expected that on those days we would have sex. Bob took a minute and then apologized and acknowledged that in the past he had felt entitled. He said he wanted to take the pressure off of me and suggested that we put sex on the back burner around holidays and special occasions, and we just focus on being together and having a good time.
Here's a good tidbit If you do not pay attention to her pain, she will. I promise she has not forgot. And if 2 weeks go by and she hasn't been triggered by anything, the avoid and ignore person is going to go, oh, sweet, wrong idea. I promise she has not forgotten about the pain. So the person brings up the pain. Even once everything's been going well for a month? Yes. And you can do that by saying, you know, we've been getting along for a month. There hasn't been a lot of triggers lately. And it just reminded me about how tumultuous I have made your life prior to this. I have caused you a lot of pain. If you do that, you will create safety for your partner. If you do not pay attention to her pain, she will. Remember the mistaken responses to the traumas and triggers: defensive, victim, turn the table, ignore and avoid, stuck in reason and logic. And you can probably make up some of your own that you've seen or experienced yourself. We don't want to do that. We want to do some training just briefly on what to do instead of that. A new way of responding. And this format that we've outlined here is a really nice format to try and also to teach. And it's an easy thing to do. You just fill in after the dots. The ways of responding. The fact that, let's just say that the person was triggered by the anniversary. The fact that you were triggered by this and that you got so upset about that is total evidence that I have caused a lot of pain for you in your life. No wife should ever have to go through that. For that, I am very sorry. I want to reassure you that I am in recovery and I am doing my best. Again, I am very sorry. What can I do for you? The advice to wait for 1 year from the beginning of treatment before any major decisions are made is a really good idea, because a lot of things will change during that year. Some helpful hints: weekly dating, and some of these are all in the handout. There's a couple things that are not in the handout. Checking in on the 9 emotions. That's not a bad idea to do that at least once a week so that the person can get familiar with their emotions. This is a list of what one man provided. That's in your handouts for his partner, and some commitment on being proactive. And the humble warrior's heart, we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Is that in the handout?
Yes.
Okay. For those who are ecclesiastical leaders, we have 2 lists here for most helpful when working with spouses and least helpful. And if you would want to contact us on our website, we will go ahead and email that to you, and we may even just post that on our web for you. And let's go out there and create a lot of safety. Thank you.